Kanagit and welcome to SUAANGAN. I'm your host, Dennis Allen. On today's show, the Mackenzie Gas Project. Thoughts of building a pipeline through the north started surfacing in the year 2000. Applications started rolling in 2001, but in a way, the true history of the pipeline started much, much earlier in time. So join us now as we go back in history in part one of the two-part series, Pipe Dreams.
These are the familiar scenes of the Arctic as we know it today. But millions of years ago, the Arctic was different. According to scientists, the Arctic was a vast tropical-like garden, filled with lush vegetation and giant animals that roamed a huge fertile land. But then the Earth changed. The tropical vegetation and those giant animals that once roamed the plains and jungles of the land we now call the Arctic died. Although scientists still debate over what killed off the dinosaurs and changed our world so radically, the fact remains that the change happened. And in its wake, the forces of nature took over. Heat and pressure over the millennia created a phenomenon that turned pockets of animal and plant materials into rich deposits of fossil fuel.
Fossil fuels are non-renewable. They're finite, and when we burn them up, we'll never get them back again. They took millions and millions of years to build up. Human beings have been on this earth only 100,000 years. So in our lifetimes, or the lifetime of human beings, they're not going to ever be fossil fuels again.
Those gas-producing products that are the result of nature's work over a millennia now heat our homes, feed manufacturing, supplies agricultural demand, and fuels our economy. And the demand and need for gas is ever increasing around the world. This means we are constantly in search of new sources of natural gas and gas-producing products. One of the searches for fossil fuel sources led to the northern Arctic. The newspaper headlines read something like this in 1973. The pressure of this discovery and the United States' desire to build a pipeline across the north touched off a controversy that would give birth on March 9, 1975, to the now famous Berger Inquiry. The judge Thomas Berger crisscrossed the north visiting towns and hamlets and gathering input from the people who lived in them. It became the biggest public inquiry in Canadian history.
30 years ago, Tom Berger came, and because Pierre Trudeau asked him to make a decision about the future of the proposed Mackenzie Valley pipeline. And he did something that was absolutely revolutionary. Rather than go in and decide on the basis of what the oil companies and what the government wanted, he said maybe it would be worthwhile to go and ask the people who live there and see what they think about this.
First of all, I went up to the Mackenzie Valley and I held some preliminary hearings in which I asked the Arctic Gas, who were the proponents of the pipeline, and the Aboriginal people's organizations and the environmental organizations and the municipalities in the NWT to come and tell me how they thought the inquiry, what they thought it should include, you know, what would be the scope of it as they saw it.
In terms of the Berger Inquiry, it was a pretty theatrical, dynamic, and, you know, full of intrigue and a lot of people involved and a lot of money to have participation. And the hearings were very well publicized all over Canada. So if one thing happened, it put the Northwest Territories on the map and the Mackenzie Valley on the map and its people. So I think that the stage was a large stage with a lot of activity and a lot of excitement, a lot of hype, and it was well sourced to get all the material on television. So it was certainly the more visual mark of what the territories was all about.
I went to every town, every village and hamlet in the Mackenzie Valley and the Western Arctic. I went as well to visit fishing camps, and I went to the oil rigs in the Beaufort Sea, or the gas rigs. I went to North Star, a very small kind of satellite community north of Tuktoyaktuk, as I recall. I went to the Arctic coast of the Yukon to see the porcupine caribou herd, and I went to just about everywhere.
After the traveling was over, and when the highly televised hearings had ended, and after 1,500 people had had a chance to make their statements, Judge Thomas Berger delivered a 240-page, 2-volume report in May of 1977.
And that report would contain some very important findings. It's also important to remember that when Thomas Berger was making his inquiries, land claims hadn't yet been settled. When SUAANGAN returns, the outcome of the Berger inquiry and the effect it had on the North. Welcome back to SUAANGAN and Part 1 of Pipe Dreams, a documentary tracing the history of the pipeline. The first proposal for a pipeline down the Mackenzie Valley came in the early 1970s, and from that came the Berger Inquiry, one of the biggest events in Canadian history.
The Berger Inquiry finally brought Canada's attention to the North, a place that had all but been ignored. It was an event that made Canadians aware of the Arctic, not only for its resources, but for its people, traditions, and a history. The Berger Inquiry made it clear that the North and its resources belonged to the people who lived there and owned the land.
I came to the conclusion as well that the pipeline would not be of any use to Aboriginal people in the North unless we settled their land claims before we built it, so that they would be players, they would have land, they would have the renewable resource economy secured, they would have money, they would be able to participate in a meaningful way.
Because of the type of project it was, and it was advocating 3 different types of routings for the pipeline, and it was considering oil as well, I think that it was a very ambitious consideration of what was needed to transport the resources south. Seemed to have much more money than this present-day pipeline in terms of what they advocate in shipping. So the pipe thought to be bigger, and the sources were like octopus strings that going different places to bring the resources in. So it was a different kind of project altogether.
So the Berger Inquiry really was a revolutionary process, because he actually went to the people who have lived in the area for thousands of years and listened to every single one that wanted to make a submission, and took that into consideration. And in the process, I think he really empowered the people. Their voice was heard, they realized that they were the true owners of this land, and he recommended in the end no pipeline until you settle the land claims with the people in that area. He recommended a number of areas be set aside forever to be protected, and he said no pipeline in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which was the camping grounds for the porcupine caribou herd. And virtually all of that now has been carried out. So 30 years later, I think Mr. Berger ought to feel very, very proud of what he set in motion.
The Berger inquiry made many recommendations, but one of the recommendations would gain the most notoriety: the 10-year moratorium on pipeline construction in the Mackenzie Delta and River Valley.
I really believe that 2/3 of the way in the pipeline, there was a realization that economically it wasn't going to fly, and probably was a miscalculation in the amount of resources that were available to get a return on the pipeline. So economically and on engineering, the engineering aspect of it, I don't believe it was very hard for Tom Berger to say we should have a 10-year moratorium. And I really believe the moratorium was more in line with the analysis of not enough resources to fill the project, and certainly not economically viable.
During the 10-year moratorium placed by Berger, no Mackenzie Valley pipeline was built. However, the first completely buried oil pipeline in Canada's permafrost started into operation in 1985. Out of Norman Wells, in the middle of the Northwest Territories, it pumps 30,000 barrels of oil a day down the Mackenzie Valley and into northern Alberta. Many would come to see this pipeline as a pilot project for future pipeline development in the Mackenzie Delta. And since the time of the Berger Report, things have changed. By the beginning of the 21st century, the northern Arctic bears little resemblance to the Arctic that was reported by Judge Berger 25 years earlier. Land claims are settled, and the peoples of the north have achieved control over their resources and their futures. The economy of the north is changing as well. For many reasons, the traditional ways of making a living are starting to disappear.
Most of even the elders were getting jobs in town. All the Aries and anybody that trapped, they couldn't get, and muskrat went to only about 90 cents if you could get one.
I've talked with a lot of Aboriginal people over the last couple of years, and I've learned that very few people any longer are living off the land. The land is primarily used for recreational purposes.
The tradition of making a living off the land is disappearing for the people of the north, and with it, so are the opportunities for the northern economy to flourish. The economy of the north is now linked to the south, and to the world economies more than it has ever been in its history. To survive and grow into the future, the north must develop economically in order to thrive, and provide a future for its youth.
In the space of probably a couple of generations here, there's been a huge change up north. Northerners realize that they need to be a part of the wage economy, and to do that, development is something that must be, I guess, accommodated, provided that development takes place in a socially and environmentally responsible manner.
Well, the Inuvialuit are very clear and upfront right from the beginning that it's a very important piece of life for them right at this time, because there is no other economic opportunity in this region. We have Inuvialuit who have been, over the years, who have worked diligently and consistently to build up their businesses. We have young people who want to go to work, and if this goes down, it'll be a disaster for all the Inuvialuit.
Myself, I see a lot of younger people benefiting because, you know, they're working and they're making a living for themselves and their family, and, you know, I think that's one thing that people sort of forget is with this you'll have problems, but you'll have people also benefiting from it with the project that's, you know, proposed right now.
Although the northern peoples know that change needs to happen, it doesn't reduce their concerns about what that change will bring, and how they can have both their traditions and modern progress at the same time.
There are, you know, in the last 40 or 50 years, there's been a lot of change in Inuvialuit society. Inuvialuit have to be given a lot of credit for the strength and endurance they've had in trying to maintain both traditional and a more modern day wage employment type of life. You can't turn back the time. I don't think Inuvialuit have to pick one or the other. They have to have both.
When SUAANGAN returns, we'll see how northern communities responded to a new era of development in the Mackenzie Valley. Welcome back to SUAANGAN and our story about the Mackenzie Gas Project, part one of the two-part series, Pipe Dreams. So far, we've looked at the Berger inquiry and how the North has changed since that inquiry. The Inuvialuit people know that change must happen for the good of our economic growth and for the future. But how do we make that change? How fast do we change? How much do we change? And how much will the cost of that change be?
The pipeline and jobs and dollars are important for people to become mobile so they can take advantage and go into the traditional pursuits. Nothing will ever be the same as it was when I was a child, where there was only one way to make a living, and that was from harvesting. And at that time, everybody harvested, but we're not living that life now. And I don't adhere that anybody should apologize for that. You know, it seems that we're under the question mark from everybody that comes in, the protectionists, the advocates of a pristine society, that people should be sitting there and not touching anything because someday they may want it, or they've messed up their land and their country so bad that the little bit that we can do is vitally important to them.
By 2002, change was on everyone's mind. The Mackenzie Gas Project proposed to develop natural gas fields in the Mackenzie Delta of Canada's Northwest Territories. Tagloops, Parsons Lake, and Naglintuk, natural gas fields, will be connected to the gathering system. Then a network of pipelines will move the natural gas and natural gas liquids to a gas processing facility near Inuvik. The Inuvik area facility is where natural gas liquids will be separated from the natural gas. Gas processing, gas chilling, and compression and liquid stabilization will happen at this facility. Once this processing is done, the gas will be transported via pipeline to Norman Wells, where it will connect with the existing Enbridge pipeline. From Norman Wells, the gas will be transported to northwestern Alberta. That's all very easy to say, but having said it, it's going to take some time to get to the point that the pipeline is or is not constructed. There's a lot to be considered.
When you look at it, there's the Environment Joint Panel Review, there's the ownership component, there's the access and benefits component, and then there's the social impact component.
And there's also the producer's proposal for the project to consider as well. They are the Aboriginal Pipeline Group, or APG, the Producers Group, and Imperial Oil Resources Ventures Limited. And who are all these people? Let's begin with APG.
APG is a unique alignment of three of the four Aboriginal groups in the Mackenzie Valley. The Inuvialuit, the Gwich'in, and the Saulteaux are currently members of the APG, and we have a seat reserved at the table for the Decho. They, of course, have the Land Claim Settlement and Self-Government Initiative as their number one priority right now. The objective of APG is to maximize the benefits through ownership in the pipeline, the long-term benefits to the Aboriginal communities in the Mackenzie Valley. We've developed some numbers based on certain assumptions, reasonable assumptions, such as our cost of debt and the applied for return on equity for the pipeline. And based on those assumptions, at 1.2 billion cubic feet a day throughput, about $20 million a year would be returned to the 4 Aboriginal regions in the Northwest Territories.
That $20 million return is expected for the first 20 years. After that time, the debt payment for the purchase of the pipeline will be repaid, and then the return is estimated to be over $100 million a year, to be shared within the northern communities. In a nutshell, that's APG's part of the proposers group. Next is the producers group, and who are they?
The ownership in the fields, Shell is a 100% owner of the Niglintak resource base. Imperial, 100% owner of the Taglu resource base. ConocoPhillips and ExxonMobil are joint ventured in the Parsons Lake resource base, ConocoPhillips being 75% owner, ExxonMobil 25% owner. Now those 4, what we call the producers, have sole ownership of the gathering system, which is the pipeline system to bring the gas and gas liquids to a central processing facility, which would then separate the liquids from the gas. It is at that point that the ownership structure changes again, and now the Aboriginal Pipeline Group, as a full partner with the producers for the gas pipeline, comes into play.
And we haven't even started to talk about the environmental joint panel review component, or the access and benefits component, or the social impact component. But don't worry, we'll get to those in part 2. To end part 1, we'd like to leave you with some of the concerns all of these groups will need to address.
I mean, I don't even think our schools are big enough if they're having more people coming into town, and a hospital, I don't know if it's big enough too, to handle all the people that's going to be here.
The question people need to ask themselves, do they want to increase the population of the Northwest Territories to, what could it be, 100,000 people, 300,000 people?
But don't lose sight of the future. What do you want your communities to be 30, 40 years down the line?
Pipelines are a bit of a mystery when you've never seen one. Development is a mystery when you haven't experienced it. So naturally there's a degree of fear. There's a degree of wanting to stay comfortable with that which you know, namely no development. Having said that, there is concern about the youth. What do the youth have to look forward to? How can we ensure our youth get training and education?
But I believe the processes that are in place will take care of that. And I have confidence in the Inuvialuit that they'll make sure those processes work.
Thank you for joining us in part 1 of Pipe Dreams. We hope you'll join us again next week for part 2. Until then, I'm your host, Dennis Allen. Kuyanakpak.